Baucis and Philemon, retold by Olivia Coolidge. One time, Zeus and Hermes came down to earth in human form and traveled through a certain district, asking for food and shelter as they went. For a long time, they found nothing but refusals from both rich and poor, until at last they came to a little one-room cottage, rudely thatched with reeds from the nearby marsh, where dwelled a poor old couple, Baucis and Philemon. The two had little to offer, since they lived entirely from the produce of their plot of land and a few goats, fowl, and pigs. Nevertheless, they were prompt to ask the strangers in and to set their best before them. The couch that they pulled forward for their guests was roughly put together from willow boughs, and the cushions on it were stuffed with straw. One table leg had to be propped up with a piece of broken pot, but Baucis scrubbed the top with fragrant mint and set some water on the fire. Meanwhile, Philemon ran out into the garden to fetch a cabbage, and then lifted down a piece of home-cured bacon from the blackened beam where it hung. While these were cooking, Baucis set out her best delicacies on the table. They were ripe olives, sour cherries pickled in wine, fresh onions and radishes, cream cheese, and eggs baked in the ashes of the fire. There was a big earthenware bowl in the midst of the table to mix their crude homemade wine with water. The second course had to be fruit, but there were nuts, figs, dried dates, plums, grapes, and apples, for this was their best season of the year. Philemon had even had it in mind to kill their only goose for dinner, and there was a great squawking and cackling that went on for a long time. Poor old Philemon wore himself out trying to catch that goose, but somehow the animal always got away from him, until the guests bade him let it be, for they were well served as it was. It was a good meal, and the old couple kept pressing their guests to eat and drink, caring nothing that they were now consuming in one day what would ordinarily last them a week. At last the wine sank low in the mixing bowl, and Philemon rose to fetch some more. But to his astonishment, as he lifted the wineskin to pour, he found the bowl was full again, as though it had not been touched at all. Then he knew the two strangers must be gods, and he and Baucis were awed and afraid. But the gods smiled kindly at them, and the younger, who seemed to do most of the talking, said, "Philemon, you have welcomed us beneath your roof this day when richer men refused us shelter. Be sure those shall be punished who would not help the wandering stranger, but you shall have whatever reward you choose. Tell us what you will have." The old man thought for a little with his eyes bent on the ground, and then he said, "We have lived together here for many years, happy even though the times have been hard. But never yet did we see fit to turn a stranger from our gate, or to seek a reward for entertaining him. To have spoken with the immortals face to face is a thing few men can boast of. In this small cottage, humble though it is, the gods have sat at meat. It is as unworthy of the honor as we are. If, therefore, you will do something for us, turn this cottage into a temple where the gods may always be served, and where we may live out the remainder of our days in worship of them." "You have spoken well," said Hermes, "and you shall have your wish. Yet is there not anything you would desire for yourselves?" Philemon thought again at this, stroking his straggly beard, and he glanced over at old Baucis with her thin gray hair and her rough hands as she served at the table, her feet bare on the floor of trodden earth. "We have lived together for many years," he said again, "and in all that time there has never been a word of anger between us. Now, at last, we are growing old, and our long companionship is coming to an end. It is the only thing that has helped us in the bad times and the source of our joy in the good. Grant us this one request, that when we come to die, we may perish in the same hour, and neither of us be left without the other." He looked at Baucis, and she nodded in approval, so the old couple turned their eyes on the gods. "It shall be as you desire," said Hermes. "Few men would have made such a good and moderate request." Thereafter, the house became a temple, and the neighbors, amazed at the change, came often to worship and left offerings for the support of the aged priest and priestess there. For many years, Baucis and Philemon lived in peace, passing from old to extreme old age. At last, they were so old and bowed that it seemed they could only walk at all if they clutched one another. But still, every evening, they would shuffle a little way down the path that they might turn and look together at the beautiful little temple and praise the gods for the honor bestowed on them. One evening, it took them longer than ever to reach the usual spot, and there they turned, arm in arm, to look back, thinking perhaps that it was the last time their limbs would support them so far. There as they stood, each one felt the other stiffen and change, and only had time to turn and say once, "Farewell," before they disappeared. In their place stood two tall trees, growing closely side by side with branches interlaced. They seemed to nod and whisper to each other in the passing breeze.